Everything happened very quickly after that. Miss Huzzy dropped her laptop on the sofa and hurried into the kitchen to get a towel. Mrs. Sharpe tried to sit up straight but began to tip off her seat, and Petra reached to help just as her hair clip popped from her head and shot beneath the coffee table. Zoomy chin-tapped, and Calder cracked heads with Early as both reached to grope around for Petra's missile. Miss Huzzy, kneeling to sop up the sugary mess, yelped in pain as her knee connected with the metal clip. An odd creaking sound came from the sofa. Was Mrs. Sharpe laughing? That's it, she wheezed. Spilling and purposeful chaos. Children, a natural asset in any sting. She paused. Infallible timing, she added under her breath, her voice suddenly distant. She closed her eyes and leaned back against a cushion. Tommy had no idea what she was talking about, but felt a tiny bit better. The word infallible sounded important, but wasn't a sting some kind of criminal setup? He remembered a great film called The Sting that he'd watched once with his mom. One bunch of gangsters had tricked another, and in such a way that the audience was also fooled until the very end. Well, Mrs. Sharpe probably never watched movies and didn't know what she was saying. Maybe she was thinking of bees. Hyde Park was full of them in the summer. Chaos would certainly distract you if you got a nasty sting. He then realized that Zoomy's notebook had slipped out of sight in the excitement and that he was chin-tapping again. Tommy leaned toward the smaller boy, retrieved the notebook, and said, I just made a horrible mess with my lemonade, and we all got clumsy and smashed into each other. Zoomy nodded and said, Sometimes I get jittery splat when I'm nervous. He paused to write for a moment in his notebook before adding, And I'm great at falling down. Jittery splat? Tommy wondered. He glanced at Zoomy's notebook and saw that he'd written, Big farming theft. It was then that Miss Huzzy took Mrs. Sharpe upstairs to rest. She returned moments later. Exciting, huh? She looked around at the kids. Think you can tackle this? 4 of the 5 glanced at one another. Zoomy held his notebook with both hands and looked straight ahead. Early said quietly, Is this for real? Does she really want our help? Absolutely, Miss Huzzy said. She realizes that kids your age can be problem solvers who are far more observant and less likely to be watched than the adults around them. Plus, as every kid knows, you guys are often misjudged or underestimated. This can be an advantage. Sometimes it's best to be overlooked, you know? Not only does she want your help, I believe she's counting on you. I'm in, Petra said. The others nodded while Zoomy raised his notebook and tapped himself lightly on the head with it. Bonk, Tommy whispered, and Zoomy grinned. Miss Huzzy stood quietly in front of the group, tightened her ponytail, and lowered her voice to its listen carefully or you'll miss it level. This is truly a compliment. Mrs. Sharpe wanting you 5 to work with her on this robbery. This matters more to her than I can tell you. Zoomy and Early, you may not know this, but Mrs. Sharpe's husband was a Vermeer scholar, and he was murdered many years ago in Amsterdam, shot in the back on the steps of a big museum. He told her the morning before his return flight that he'd uncovered something huge, but that he couldn't yet share it, and then, poof, tragically, he was gone. Mrs. Sharpe has tried unsuccessfully to solve that crime. The police wrote it off as a random act of street violence. She never believed that, having heard the edge of excitement and nervousness in her husband's voice. Obviously, he hadn't felt it was safe to share this news over the telephone. Mrs. Sharpe has replayed this moment 1,000,000 times in her mind and devoted much of the rest of her life.